Greetings and welcome to Kihchikaw Aski, Sacred Land. My name is Cardinal, and I'm the Senior Advisor for the Indigenous Knowledge and Wisdom Center, and had the honor to be the project manager in building this beautiful site, Kihchikaw Aski Sacred Land. It started 17 years ago when myself and Elder Will Campbell presented to the city of Edmonton the first concept of an urban Indigenous ceremonial space. The city wasn't familiar with Indigenous cultural activities and the necessity of having access to culture. And one of the questions we posed to the city was, why do we, as Indigenous people, have to be the only people who leave the city in order to do our basic ceremonies, our sweat lodges, pipe ceremonies, feasts? And we said, the future of our children and future generations need to be grounded in who they are, need to be grounded in the traditions of their ancestors, because it makes them strong. This site here, the reason why we call it sacred land is because that's exactly what it is. The land teaches us. The land helps us connect to that great mystery, to Mother Earth. It forces us to examine who we are and how we live on it. And so through that, our cultures have been shaped. The languages that we speak have been shaped by our relationship to Mother Earth. So now, as we've built this site, it's in continuous use. There's activities, there's teaching programs, the schools come down here, from post-secondary to primary education. We have international visitors who come here to experience the site, and we get to share our ceremony. But working with those 177 Indigenous elders, they also represent all of the nations in Canada, all of the Indigenous nations, which are about 67 of them, all different, all unique in their language, customs, and ceremonial traditions. So how do you work with that? Well, you work through using the talking circle and ceremony. And through that, it becomes a healing process within the community. You can address issues, but you come to a conclusion, you come to settle any issues that you might have. And that's the wondrous work of the circle. And as you can see, the site is covered in circles. We have a gathering space that welcomes all different kinds of nations to come and join in ceremony around the sacred fire that's at the center of it. We have our sweat lodge circles that welcome and invite different Indigenous nations to do their sweat lodges. And so this space then becomes a multi-purpose cultural ceremonial site that supports all the different nations that make Edmonton their home. What's really interesting about this site is its connection to water, both above ground and below ground, the rain, the storms. But when we were identifying this space, one of the things that the elders insisted upon, that it needed to be close to water. The site that we would choose needs to be close to water. It needs to be close to the river or a creek. And so we had been thinking about the space as a possible location back in the day. And they said, yes, this is a perfect site because it's embraced by Mother Earth still. And that was one of the prerequisites. Make sure that it's a place that is clean, or as clean as can be. And this site here was perfect for that. But what was important was the connection to the water, the creek that runs through here. We have the White Mud Creek Ravine that we're in right now. And that water, as we know, we call it the first medicine. That's why it's important to be connected to water, to have access to that water. And so this White Mud Ravine was called White Mud. I think it was 1849 when the Palliser expedition was coming through Fort Edmonton. They took a break here for a few days or a week to regroup and resupply before they went off on the rest of their expedition out into the Rocky Mountains. But while they were here, Dr. James Hector went with a guide and a canoe to do a little bit of local exploring. And he came up this creek at this time, that just off the North Saskatchewan River, which is about 400 meters away from here or less, and came up here and noticed the white walls of this ravine. And he called it White Mud. And ever since then, it was called the White Mud Creek. But there's also a Red Mud, and that's another story. But it's connected. All along the creek here, we have so much medicines that still grow. This was a place of water. This is how it was born. And then when the water left, the land started to lift. And so then the water found a new path, what is now called the North Saskatchewan River. Because then the water adjusted it because the land was raising and it started to move east. And then it became what is now known as the North Saskatchewan River. So the connection of kihchikaw aski, sacred land, is connected to that water. It's connected to the river that's just 400 meters away. This creek empties into it. Once the water left here and the land rose, there's a sacred spring just across the creek from here, maybe 150 meters or less. And it is still running. It started to run 11,900 years ago once the land lifted up. And it's still running today. And what has it done? It's deposited a huge mineral tufa, which is just filled with ochre. And so the ochre, as you know, is a very sacred thing for ceremonies for a lot of Indigenous nations. And so is the white mud. The white mud is used in a lot of traditions, like rites of passage for young ladies. They would pat down the white mud and then put a teepee over it. And for 4 days, as a rite of passage, she'd be sung to by her grandmothers and aunts, and they'd be telling her stories and teaching her medicine. And then at the end of 4 days, they would present her to the nation as a woman of the nation. That white mud was a necessary part of it. It's used throughout many altars that with the Blackfoot, the Assiniboine people. So white mud became a very important part. Spiritually, we didn't know that at the time. These are the stories that really the land started to share with us. And what was interesting is that when we discovered that spring that is still running and depositing ochre still to this day, in February of this year, a spring appeared right close to the sweat lodge ceremonies. It just came out of the ground. And one of the teachings that I learned about that is that when the people return, the land remembers. And so it started to reveal things to us. And because of that, we shared their stories with other Indigenous nations. And they said, and the Siksika people said, and the Piikani people said, from southern Alberta, they said, we used to come by here during fort trading days. And we would stop at that ochre site, that spring of which you speak, and we'd take the ochre and take it home with us and pick the medicines around here before we left. And so by having that sacred water present itself to us again, it is telling us another story. And it's to remember its sacredness, its first medicine, and how we need it so much as human beings. And so it connects us to the great North Saskatchewan River in a way that we never realized before. And it's still running, and it's still there, and the people have returned.